So for those of you who don't know, I actually have a YouTube account and I do like little Bible studies. I read through chapters in Genesis and I explain what God's intended meaning was and how you can apply it to your life. So actually a while ago I actually read through Genesis 1, and in that video I explained that a long time ago during the Old Testament, especially in Exodus, when Israel was slaves in Egypt, the Egyptians, they would worship things like the sun, the moon, and the stars. And this is God's creation. God created the sun and the moon and the stars to point to God himself. The sun and the moon and the stars were created to show that there is a creator. They couldn't come to existence on their own. An intelligent being had to create them. And these sun and the moon and the stars should have pointed to God. But instead of the Egyptians seeing it as God creating the sun and the moon and the stars, they worshipped them. They were their false gods. And the reason people worshipped creation back then and false God is because God created us to worship. We were made to worship. Now, because we have a sinful nature, what we were made to worship God, our sinful nature taints to make it where we worship false gods and creation and things that were never meant to worship. We worship these things that were never meant to fulfill us. Only God was meant to fulfill us. Now, we even worship things today that we wouldn't admit that we worship. Worship is actually anything you put your identity in, anything that you spend more time with than God himself. Worship is anything that you find your identity in, that you cannot live without. We can worship our phones, we can worship our friends, we can worship our family, sports, grades, even our career. All these are things that we can worship instead of God without even realizing it. Now we try to worship these things, we try to use these things to identify ourselves and to fill us with satisfaction and to give us purpose. But all these things will do when we worship the wrong thing is disappoint us. Because guess what? If you find your identity in your grades, you make a bad grade, you lose yourself, you get an injury in sports, you lose your identity, you don't know who you are without that. That's why these things, these worldly things, were never meant to satisfy you. Only God was meant to satisfy you. You were only meant to worship and find your identity in God. Because while you might lose your identity to worldly things that come your way, but God, he always says, no matter what, you are valuable. You know why? Because you are made in his image. No matter what, you are important. You know why? Because you are a child of God. When it seems like no one else loves you and your worldly thing fails you, God never does. God is always with you. No matter what, if you get your injury, your sports team might leave you, but you know who won't? God, because you are not identified by that sport. You are identified as a child of God. Only God shows us unconditional love. Only God can bring us satisfaction and purpose. So instead of worshiping creation or false gods, why don't we worship God who loves us unconditionally and gives us a purpose?